Good day. Today is going to be one of those interesting days, that I can tell you the least. Today we're speaking to Dr. Peter Hammond from Frontline Ministries. Dr. Peter Hammond has had an illustrious career in standing up against tyranny and sneaking in between, behind iron curtains, and doing all those things that most of us watch in movies. Dr. Peter Hammond has actually lived. And we're going to tap into that absolute well of knowledge that he has around these subjects and look at potential solutions to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of allowing ourselves to be ruled over by tyrants.
Wild, busy. Gee, I tell you, I thought we were busy before lockdown, but we've gotten busier since. And one of the reasons it is, well, one of the reasons is we didn't lock down. We carried on having meetings and people poured in and we found ourselves busy, and then more and more radio and TV and Zoom and Skype. And I had a Bible study last night with an English church in Cornwall, in the UK. And I had two other radio programs. I've been out at Fishhook yesterday morning for meeting. Tonight I've got an 8 o'clock with the people in Australia, Loving Life, Scott Belson. This morning I had an 11 o'clock 1 hour radio program with an English radio program. And it's like that. There's just a lot on the go and our mission's busy. We had our weekly devotions normally straight after lunch on Wednesday. So it's like I've been on a treadmill. A lot of me had Tuesday night, last night I also had a radio program with the States in New York before the evening Bible study. And so that's the way it's been. It's been plus two other radio recordings within in studio for Radio Tigerberg and also from the front line. So that's just we're only on the third day of this week, and but it's been like that. And we're expecting on Tuesday a 20-foot container shipment to offload Bibles and books, which is about 18 tons, about 4,000 packages of boxes that have to be offloaded by hand. So that's our frontline gym. And we've got a music concert coming up here for Heritage Day on the 24th. That's the way it's going. It's been very busy, very, very, very good. We've got a big demonstration coming up this Saturday against the lockdowns and masks and so on up at on Seapoint Promenade. So
what sort of getting off the? I've noticed more and more people that have succumbed to this whole concept of taking the vaccine and all that sort of stuff. It just, you know, but a definite separation of people. I went to a dinner with the CEO of SA Taxis. They fund all the taxis in South Africa. And there was literally one side of the table was those that were vaccinated, and the other side of the table were those that aren't vaccinated. And I found it so hilarious because I'm like, excuse me, guys, you're vaccinated. So why did you get vaccinated if you still have to separate? I mean, that doesn't really make sense, does it? And they couldn't answer it.
It's a new religion. It's the COVID cults. I call them the branch Covidians. And it's now salvation by vaccination. This is your baptism into the New World Order religion. And you must play the masquerade to show that you're part of the visible part of this new religious cult. And of course, the devil is COVID, and the demons are those who don't want to play the masquerade and get the vaccine and so on. And it's heresy and treason, and you've got to burn at the stake with the Inquisition, anyone who disagrees. And it's a whole new religion. And you've got to believe. You must believe in COVID. You must trust in the government. And it's absolutely bizarre. I don't think we've seen anything like it, actually.
No, well, I must admit, if you think of the beginning of last year, who would have thought that we would be here today? I mean, it's an impossibility.
If they had it for a plot for a film, you'd have said, this is really off the wall, impossible. What a total fictional. It's like a Monty Python comedy. How on earth can anyone take this seriously?
I mean, it's incredible. But you know what I'm finding amazing is the similarities of operation to the whole Tower of Babel thing. I mean, if you think about that process that they went through in the Tower of Babel, you know, Nimrod saying, let us make name for ourselves. So now we see the Faucis and everything making name for themselves, so that we can keep the people here, so that we can control the people, in other words, and then fear. Let's build this tower because we don't want to be flooded again. It's the same modus operandi. It's never changed.
Yeah.
And we seem to be in that same process right now, creating that government that they wanted to create at the time of the Tower of Babel, to dictate to the people their actions and everything, and using fear.
Yeah, it's fear. That's it. That's the driving force.
That's it. And what's fascinating about fear is it makes people think illogically. That's the whole thing with. So, I mean, I'm finding it fascinating how I remember I've had a lot of clients that I've had to assist in times that were going through difficulties, and you look at when you're dealing with them, that irrationality they have when that fear steps in, especially when you're dealing with liquidations and things like that. And the minute you step in and you think with a clear, coherent mind, you're able to sidestep the pitfalls that are there. But I mean, in this situation, you can feed a person anything when he's in fear. And I'm afraid we've fallen into that trap, don't you think?
Yeah. And of course, the big difference, you know, people who will vax, masquerade, and all the rest, and those who won't, just what's their source of news? The people who are locked into SABC, ETV, CNN, BBC, and so on, they are following the masquerade. And the people who have disconnected and are into alternative news media, you've got to be kidding. No way. So it's basically who you're trusting and who you're going to for your source of info. Yeah.
But I think it's also that the fact that those that have gotten out of the CNNs and all those sort of things is because the logic isn't making sense anymore. We've reached that stage where we realize, but what they're saying doesn't make sense.
Yes.
So we still have that logical thought process. But then when you put the question to, like I said, when I was at that dinner and I put the question, so why did you have the vaccine if you still have to be careful of me? I mean, I'm the one at risk, not you, isn't it? And it didn't compute. It's almost like the switch is off, you know, it just didn't.
You know who Jim Jones is? Jim Jones ran a cult in British Guiana back in the 80s, and he had over 900 of his followers drink the Kool-Aid, which had poison, and all committed suicide. Remember that?
Yes. Yeah, I remember.
I saw an excellent meme. There's a picture of Jim Jones, and it said, the Kool-Aid won't work unless you all drink it. I think that's what's going on with this vaccination thing. My vaccination can't work unless everyone else is vaccinated. Doesn't make sense, but this is their mentality, which makes me wonder what on earth is in this damn vaccination. Because there's got to be something really bad. Because really bad, or they wouldn't be bullying us and coercing us as much. Because if it really was safe and effective, you wouldn't need to propagandize, bully, cajole, bribe, threaten, mandate. I've never seen anything like this before.
The wheels are coming off, though. I mean, if you look at what's happening in Israel and those sort of countries, the wheels are busy coming off, and the more the wheels start coming off, the more desperate they become. I don't know if you've noticed. They'll become more and more.
Like Fauci, it's now exposed, totally exposed. The coronavirus is man-made from a laboratory in China, in Wuhan, funded by US taxpayers, and Fauci knew about it and funded and supported it, and they've all been lying to cover it up for over 18 months. Now, I mean, this would have got you deplatformed last year and damned as a fake news, and yet now it's mainstream news, thanks to people like Senator Rand Paul, who's brought out the mainstream. But this
Yeah.
isn't even questionable now. It's the facts are out there.
Yeah.
And it just reminds you that Bill Gates made his fortune in part by sending out viruses to force people to buy his antivirus software.
Yeah.
You kind of see a trend coming somewhere.
Slight pattern happening.
Create the problem, offer the solution.
Yeah. Well, it's the same way that totalitarianism gets implemented. Create the problem and come up with a solution. I mean, if we think of what Stalin did when he got rid of the farmers in order to create the hunger, so that he could give them the food that he was offering. You know, it's
make them dependent on the state. That's right.
Yeah.
So this is communism: thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and they call it the Hegelian dialectic. And so you want people to go there, so you go this way to force them to go that way, and in the end you go the way you really want them to go in the first place. So they do a revolutionary action, and they want the counter-revolutionaries to react a certain way, so that they can then get what they were aiming at all along. And I don't think we've seen communism advance as much in the last century as it has under this so-called COVID lockdown. Not even Mao Zedong or Joseph Stalin have managed to close down as many churches as the Wuhan Health Organization's COVID crisis, lockdown lunacy, masquerade madness has managed to do. This is just absolutely insane. And sadly, for the most part, most churches have gone along with it. They've allowed themselves to be silenced, sidelined, and shut down, as though, oh, churches are non-essential. Who says? Politicians are telling us the church are non-essential. Well, the abortion clinic's essential. The casino is essential. Macro is essential. And macro can have a couple of hundred, even 1,000 people, and that's not a problem. But you can have a 5,000-seater church, but you can't have more than 50 people in it, according to lockdown level 4. Who makes these rules up? And the charade of going through distancing as you queue in for the plane. Then you get in the plane, they cram you all into those same seats. Nobody gets space for your elbows. And then afterwards, back to the masquerade. Keep it only one row at a time. Maintain 1.5 meters distances. Don't be ridiculous. We've just been shorn, didn't we, for the last several hours, and now they're acting like this is really serious. This has nothing to do with science or medicine. This has everything to do with control. And to think people are putting up with this, this is the most outrageous power grab and erosion of freedoms in our lifetime.
You know what I find fascinating? That whole thing in the plane is the charade goes so far that if you want to get up and go to the bathroom while you're on the plane, you've got to social distance. While you're walking down a narrow passage with passengers on both sides of you, but you've got to have 1.5 meters from the person in front of you. I mean, it's just
while you're sandwiched in shoulder to shoulder in the seats, and the seats are really, really crammed, and
yes,
they want to pretend that this is making a difference.
No, but remember, we mustn't forget the special filters that they've got on that get rid of the virus, because I think that was the excuse they used why the planes could continue flying, was because of these special filters that can stop a virus. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it?
What kind of filters? The ones that circulate the air all over the place? That's
the one, yeah.
Yeah.
Must have this thing that kills viruses, because I've never heard of it.
Well, maybe they could bring it into schools and all that too. That would be nice. But yes,
all our problems is that if we had those filters, because then we could sit right on top of each other and not have a problem. I think somebody's missed the business opportunity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like the taxis, they can be 150% capacity overflowed. That's okay. That's not a problem. But don't walk your dog alone in the park and arrest that person running around an empty field, and have the police mobilized by the hundreds to keep people off the beaches in the heat of summer. But you can go to the beach in the middle of the freezing winter when everyone's dying of Arctic cold. Then you can go to the beach, but not when it's boiling hot and everyone wants to go to the beach. And sorry, the police aren't available when they're actually looting and burning and destroying shops and warehouses. But the police and army come out for really important things like that person's not wearing the mask, you know.
Yeah. So, Peter, if you think about it, where are we heading? I mean, we've shown the obvious things over here. where are we heading? I mean, where is this going to end up?
Well, there's a couple of sources that give us hints. The one thing is Brave New World, written by Aldous Huxley back in 1930s, which was predicting a future technologically advanced age where people are drugged and overstimulated by endless distractions from media and from drugs to keep them in a subdued state where the state controls them. That's one view of the future. Then there's the other view of George Orwell, 1984. Now, George Orwell had been a policeman in the British Imperial Police in Burma. He had been a journalist. He had been a propagandist for the British government in the BBC during the Second World War. In fact, he based Mini-Truth, Ministry of Truth, on his experiences in the BBC as a propagandist during the war. And hence, he, as you can see in 1984, George Orwell, who was once a communist and a socialist, and later he saw the workers' paradise in Stalin's Soviet Union for what it was, and he wrote Animal Farm in 1984. And 1984 is prophetic in a real sense, because there he envisages a time when the Ministry of Truth deals in lies and propaganda, the Ministry of Plenty engineers famines and starvation and rationing, the Ministry of Love deals with torture, and the Ministry of Peace deals with war. And that's exactly the way they work. And there's newspeak, and there's thought crimes, and you need thought police to deal with thought crimes, and that's what we're getting now. He saw where the thought police would be taking people and unpersoning them, where they become vaporized and they disappear down the memory hole because they express views that aren't. And today you get unfriended, deplatformed, and same sort of thing. It's just uncanny. But the most scary of all is when you turn to Book of Revelation, the Bible, Revelation 13. A one world government with a one world economic system and a one world interfaith religion, and everyone's got to get a mark without which you will not be allowed to buy or sell. Now, if this doesn't start ringing some bells and getting some people thinking, this is eerily, nobody could have predicted this 2 years ago. That it would be a crime to breathe oxygen, and that you are meant to walk around with a mask around yourself totally, and that your poor kids, not even at risk of this anyway, because children have never been seriously at risk from this COVID-19. Just besides which, I've had COVID-19. Everyone in my family and our mission have had COVID-19. It was worse than the average flu, nowhere near as bad as tick bite fever, bilharzia, malaria, hepatitis, or any of the other things that we get in the field. I was brought up in Rhodesia. We got all these diseases. It didn't stop us playing outside, swimming in the dams and the rivers and all that. And as a missionary, we've all had malaria. It doesn't stop us going in the field. The idea that you would commit economic suicide, which isn't accurate, because suicide suggests it's voluntary. This wasn't voluntary. It's more like economic murder, to destroy the jobs, the incomes, the businesses of millions of people around the world, actually tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people's lives have been bankrupted and wrecked, and in their social lives and churches and societies and clubs and sports, and so to have it all shut down. This is what makes life worth living. And to have put most of the retired people in the old age homes into what is effectively prisons, where they are not allowed out, and you're not allowed in, and family can't visit them, and people have died alone in ICU without a family member allowed to visit them and even say goodbye. Just the criminal wickedness of these lockdowns. And I call them lockdown lunacy because it makes no sense. Masquerade madness is another term I use. And what we're dealing with is the COVID cult. And it's really branch Covidians. These people are into a new religion where they are now propagating salvation by vaccination. And if you haven't been vaccinated, it's like you haven't been baptized into this church, and the Inquisition is going to be out there to get you. If you commit a thought crime, if you question us, they will scream the equivalent of traitor, heretic, blasphemer, whatever it is against the New World Order, and they will seek to take you down. So what we're seeing right now is, I think, a mixture of the dystopian views of the future of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and George Orwell's 1984 and Revelation 13's one world government, one world religion, one world economic system, and you must get the mark or you will not be allowed to travel and so on. This is where we are, and I would say this is revolution, this is communism, because what is communism? Communism, as I can say, I spent most of my life ministering behind the Iron Curtain and into communism and other totalitarian states. 39 years I've been doing this, going into war-torn and restricted access countries. Under communism, and you understand what communism is, it's ruled by committee. So a Soviet is a committee. So the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the Union of Committee-run Socialist Republics. Just like the French Revolution was run by committee under the chairmanship of Robespierre, and it was called the Committee for Public Safety. I mean, how innocuous and nice is that? Committee for Public Safety. So what did the Committee for Public Safety determine? Well, who got guillotined, for example? 40,000 people got guillotined, another 300,000 shot by firing squads, and millions more died in the Napoleonic and French Revolutionary Wars, which was done by the Committee for Public Safety. It was obviously for your good. And so the Soviet Union is ruled by committee. And by the way, Robespierre had a committee of 6. Soviet Union Politburo initially was a committee of 6. And we were told by dear Uncle Cyril last year that we've been ruled now by a committee of 6, but don't worry, they're consulting the ancestors, which made us all feel so much better. And now, what is communism? They tell you who can work, how you can work, where you can work, when you can work, for how long you can work, and show me your papers. And there's internal travel restrictions where they will literally show me your papers. And that is communism. And to think that you can literally have the communists taking the power that they can actually tell people you can't go to church, you can't celebrate Easter, you can't do this and that. In Zimbabwe, the police and army are kicking down doors, going into churches and dragging people out and saying you're not allowed to attend church unless you're vaccinated. I mean, how nice is that? It's no longer persecution of the church. This is a health concern. You know, the people who shoot you and steal from you, they're really concerned for your health. And they're only doing this out of love in their heart because it's in your best interest. Just like when Cyril mobilized the SANDF to beat people up and shoot their dogs and shoot people even to save their lives from dying of COVID. I mean, how terrible. We can't let you get COVID. I mean, you've got a 99.7% chance of surviving, but nevertheless, just in case you might catch this disease, which most of you won't even know because you won't even have the symptoms, because most people who test positive on this PCR test are actually asymptomatic, which means they're not sick. And you would never test healthy people. That's just not in medical practice. When you're testing people, it's because there's something wrong and you're wanting to confirm what's wrong with them because there's symptoms. If there's no symptoms, the person's not sick. At any one time in your body, we may have cancer cells, we may have we may have a wide variety of viruses and so on that our body's dealing with. But if we're not sick and we have no symptoms, it means that we've got a healthy immune system that's combating and handling these things, and there's no need for medical intervention. This is just normal immunity that you've got. We should be grateful for it. But sticking these brain harvesting tools down people's nostrils and scraping part of the brain cells out, or what, if this virus is so contagious that just the air around you might have it, then why can't they just take something from the inside of your lip? But no, they've got to go brain harvesting up there. What are they excavating? Are they planting some microchip? Are they trying to damn? It's just bizarre, the intrusiveness of these tests. And you wonder what is going on with this vaccination. Why should we trust it when the people producing these vaccines have lobbied governments around the world to have legislation giving them indemnity from liability? Now, if your product's so safe and effective, why would you need liability from prosecution and indemnity from any liability? It just doesn't make sense. And if it's so good and necessary, why do you need to brainwash and cajole and bully people? When I was in Rhodesia, nobody had to propagandize or have endorsements from famous people saying, you've got to get mosquito nets. If you get malaria, you need quinine. You need tabard lotion to prevent you getting malaria. We took it because it worked and we needed it. Nobody needs to threaten me. You're not allowed to come in here if you don't have your mosquito net and your tabard lotion and quinine tablets. I mean, honestly, how pathetic is that? It's totally unnecessary. If it works and it's successful, you wouldn't need to deplatform people for disagreeing with you. You wouldn't need to threaten medical professionals. Just take in Cape Town. I was at a demonstration outside Frederick Hospital just a short while ago. Dr. Susan Foslu committed a thought crime. She said the vaccination is more dangerous than the virus. Well, she got demonized and attacked from all over. And what does she know? She's just stupid. She's ignorant. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Wait a minute. Who's Dr. Susan Foslu? Well, she's a heart transplant specialist. In fact, since 1988, when she was the first woman to do heart transplants in South Africa, she's been, in fact, head of departments, including of not just of heart transplants, she's also been head of department for infectious diseases. Now, you would think she knows what she's talking about. I mean, somebody who even could have studied in the time of Chris Barnard. And here she says there's a tremendous danger of blood clots and heart disease and heart failures and strokes for especially men who are taking the vaccine. Now, this isn't a field of expertise, you would have thought. And surely this is a free country. And if she's wrong, or prove she's wrong, bring out the facts. But no, they're screaming for her to be stripped of her medical degrees, to not be allowed to practice medicine. This is insane. And there's many medical specialists all over the world. You can just look, America's Frontline Doctors, Doctors for Truth-Based Netherlands. There's many groups all over that are saying, this is not safe, this is not normal. And as Dr. Susan Foslu said, the recipe, so to speak, the ingredients for these vaccines are treated like some secret. But any pharmaceutical should have, this is what it contains, and these are the side effects, and these are the contraindications. That's professional. It's not professional to say, trust us. And we've got indemnity from liability as well. So there's something really sinister going on here. And, you know, we went to this event. I was invited to speak as well in support of Susan Foslu outside Pretoria Hospital. And afterwards, I got home and my wife is receiving hate mail because her husband took partners. And I was thinking we'd done a good thing. We'd stood up for an underdog who's being victimized like by modern inquisition. Well, then her friends are, how could your husband be so cruel, so unfeeling, so callous? How dare he go and demonstrate against the poor, hardworking doctors and nurses of Pretoria Hospital who sacrificing their lives and laying their lives on the line every day for the COVID patients, and they're dying like flies. And I went back, I looked at my picture. Nobody had any posters demonstrating against the staff of Pretoria. We're standing up for one of the doctors against this kind of nonsense. And the media portrayed this demonstration in support of Dr. Susan Foslu as a demonstration against the staff and the doctors and nurses of Pretoria Hospital. If these people had any integrity, if this had any legitimacy, they wouldn't need to lie to cover it up.
Well, we know that everything needs to be lied about because, when brought under scrutiny, nothing stands up to it. We were having a conversation with a doctor, also a neurosurgeon, who was talking about, he also does, he actually looks at the legalities of the lawsuits around medical practices and all those matters. And he was talking about expert opinion being the lowest form of proof of something, and how at the moment that is all that is driving this whole process. There's no proper clinical studies. There's nothing like that. He brought ivermectin as an example, where here you had a product that was being used all over the world. It's being used within Central Africa for diphtheria and various other things. Billions of shots being applied throughout the world, and not a single death. Yet the narrative out there is this is a horse drug. It was made for horses, and you cannot use it. It's going to kill people. An absolute lie. We're living a lie. We yes. know that anyone with an ounce of thought in his head knows we're living a lie. How do we counter it?
Resistance. It's so important for us to resist. For example, one of the most important forms of resistance one can take when you're living in an age of the lie is, as Dr. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, he said, the lie has become a pillar of the state. Now, he's referring to the Soviet Union at the time, but we could say about a lot of our countries these days. Yeah. The lie is a pillar of the state. And he said, the most courageous action an individual can do is to refuse to partake in a lie. He said, let your credo be this: let the lie come, let it even prosper, but not through me. I refuse to be part of the lie, and I refuse to propagate the lie, and I will not bow before the lie. Now, Alexander Solzhenitsyn ended up in the Gulag. He wrote The Gulag Archipelago, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, The Cancer Ward, and many other great books. Greatest Russian author of the 20th century, fine thinker, brilliant man. But Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, we need to resist. And sometimes your only resistance may be silence.
Yeah.
When you're in Gulag, but you must not partake in the lie. So I think that's the first thing. And I think the next thing is disconnect from the propaganda, disinformation industry. The lies, the deceit, the disinformation, the blatant propaganda that's being pushed by the Bolshevik Broadcasting Corporation, the Communist News Network, Slime Magazine, Newspeak, Useless News and World Report, Satanic Altar Television, Evil TV, the Sunday Crimes. I mean, honestly, these are not just mainstream anymore, they're lamestream. And they've been proven to be false. The amount of lies. And do you remember 2016, the day of the election in America in 2016? Hillary Clinton, 98% chance of winning, Trump 0. something percent chance of winning. And you know what the newspaper headline front cover was of the Cape Times the day after the election results came out? It's got Hillary's hands up there, Hillary wins. That was the front page in the Cape Times because they had obviously printed believing all these predictions. And now, how could they be so wrong? They believe their own propaganda, but they're wrong on so many things, Remember this whole thing back in 26 March last year, 2020, what was Cyril saying to us? Millions of South Africans are going to die of this COVID. Hundreds of millions are going to die around the world. And we were seeing pictures, obviously fake pictures, of people just dropping dead all over the place in Wuhan, China. And you know, the people are dying by the thousands in Italy. And it's just, and the morgues can't accommodate, and the doctors are overwhelmed. It was all fake. And the pictures turned out to be fake and fraud. But it was enough to stampede people to, we got to lock down, got to wear the mask, got to this and the other. And later on, you look back and you see it's a lie. And remember back then when for example, President Trump was saying, this comes from China. Why are you calling it China virus? Because it comes from China. And they went berserk. How could he say so? Well, now we know it is. And then they deplatform people. I got threatened, amount of things, you know, suspended rights on Facebook and so on, because I dared to put on the tracking down the origins of the Wuhan virus, which is an excellently made video that came out in May, which showed this is produced in China in this laboratory, top specialists, and even quoting from Chinese books on asymmetrical warfare and how Chinese People's Liberation Army general, who just happened to be in charge of Wuhan bacteriological warfare laboratory at the time that the whole thing came out, but he had written a book many years ago about we're already at war with the United States of America, and we cannot beat them on conventional weapons. We need to use biological weapons, economic warfare, and so on and so forth. And this person happens to be in a laboratory at the time. Well, all this totally fake news, fact checkers have checked. What fact checkers? How sometimes you put out something, and seconds after you put something brand new out there, fact checkers have. How can they? They haven't even had time to do the research. And but this is the point. The fact checkers are the thought police of George Orwell's 1984 novel. These fact checkers check if you've got facts and they deplatform you. I think. You've got to realize that that's the whole thing that they're there for, is not to ensure that facts get out, but to ensure that the facts don't get out. But now we know. And so resistance, I think, first of all, disconnect from the liars, disconnect from the disinformation media, and also getting our children out of the state indoctrination gulags, which are now child abuse centers, forcing kids, even primary school, to wear masks all day, forcing some kids to wear masks while they're involved in sports. This is not just unhealthy. This is extreme child abuse. You know, imagine if you forced your child to walk around wearing a helmet, motorbike helmet, all day because you're afraid of the danger of maybe a meteorite hitting him or a coconut falling from a tree. And yet there's more chance of that happening than a child contracting and dying from COVID. But anyway, this is an example of child abuse. But they can force kids to wear masks for something that they've got next to no chance of catching. And if they do, it's going to be very minor and they'll recover from it. Why would you do this? Why would you abuse children like this? It's not that they're trying to control a virus. They're trying to control us, trying to control people. They even want to control our thinking, not just our behavior. So resistance, to me, home educating is a tremendous act of resistance. Supporting alternative news media is a tremendous act of resistance. We've got to resist on every level. So, for example, I will go out without playing the masquerade. I will do everything I can to avoid it. And if I'm required in some places, okay, I might put it up for the few moments needed and then take it off again. But as much resistance as possible. And in our meetings and so on, we're not going to play the masquerade. During National Women's Day, we mobilized over 60 odd individuals to be involved in 12 different outreaches, and we distributed tens of thousands of leaflets. And I was for 4 hours on the streets at a busy intersection and then walking along Sea Point Promenade distributing literature. Didn't wear a mask the whole time. And I gave literature to policemen, Metro Police, SAPS, and traffic police, both in vehicles and on the promenade. And none of them asked me to put on a mask or so on. I just carried on. Some people gave me a dirty look, but the point is more and more people are resisting. And I think that's so important that there's got to be, we mustn't just comply. If somebody comes and forces you, that's one thing. While you're being forced to, do what the Eastern European people did what they had to do to survive. But the moment the back is turned to the KGB or whatever, you go back to doing what you know is right, and you refuse to become a slave. So resistance. I think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There they are, being told, bow before this idol. And their response is, our God, whom we serve, is able to save us. And he will. But even if he doesn't, we still won't bow before your idols, nor will we serve your gods. And I think we just need to say, I don't want to be part of this COVID cult. I don't believe in salvation by vaccination. I don't trust Bill Gates. I don't trust Moderna. I don't trust AstraZeneca. I don't trust Johnson & Johnson. I don't trust Pfizer. These guys are repeat felons. They have had to pay over $35 billion in the US courts for admission of guilt for different crimes of broken in the past, not to do with vaccines. I've gotten indemnity against liability for vaccines, but for other pharmaceutical products they've produced. For things like lying, putting false information in products, killing people, things like that. Now, why would you trust repeat felons with vaccines that you give them indemnity and liability for? And then you look at a man like Bill Gates, who has said personally, publicly, the best investment he's ever made was vaccines. Bill Gates said, where else can you make 1,000% return on your investment? 1,000% return on your investment? That seems immoral. I mean, how's it even possible? But with vaccines, they make 1,000% return on investments. Do you know that there's 9 new billionaires in the world today from the last 18 months lockdown through vaccines alone? 9 new billionaires. This whole scam is making a whole lot of people billionaires while it's impoverishing hundreds of millions of people. And so out of the misery and oppression of so many hundreds of millions of people, there's a few at the top who are getting filthy rich. But the main thing about this is they're extending their power and they're taking away our freedoms. And that's the goal. This is a communist agenda for sure.
But some people getting rich and others being impoverished. I have noticed that the middle class seems to be disappearing. And we know that with communism, you need to get everybody as poor as possible so that they're reliant on the state. What do you think about this talk of a universal wage and these things that are beginning to be pushed? I mean, even in South Africa, they're now talking about taking 12% of everyone's salaries so that they can create a state pension fund and a universal wage for everyone that isn't working. What are your thoughts on those things?
Oh, I mean, it's such total tripe and rubbish. According to the African Union Task Force on Corruption, the government steals 1/3 of the GDP, the gross domestic product, every year. Now, we're talking about 32% of the gross domestic product is stolen by government. Now, we're not talking about normal crime. We're not talking about taxation. That's another story. We're not even talking about inflation, which is a hidden tax. But they are stealing, according to the AU's own statistics, 32% of the gross domestic product of Africa stolen by government through corruption. Now, this government has stolen trillions, trillions and trillions. Forget about Nkandla. That is pocket change compared to the rest that they've stolen. It's colossal. Now, when we have had economists looking at this, and I'm thinking of people like Stephen Mitford Goodson, who was once director of the Sovereign Reserve Bank, whistleblower, wrote the book Inside the Sovereign Reserve Bank, and Central Banking Enslaved of Mankind. He says, we don't need income tax. We don't need VAT. We don't need GST. We don't need sales tax of any sort. All we need is TEAL, Total Economic Activity Levy, where 1%, in fact, when you look at it, not even 0.5%, 0.5% of every economic bank transaction gets deducted for tax. That'll be more than enough that any government needs. The key thing is it's got to be across the board, including Anglo-American, Old Mutual, all the tax-exempt groups and so on. If everyone does it, not just the middle class getting hammered with income tax and so on, but who minds 0.5%? And that'll do everything. The roads, the lights, the plumbing, everything. Now, this is like a tax haven. Then you'll create jobs, because what happens in Singapore? How did Singapore do so well? A small little island, secession from 1965 from Malaysia, a swamp, no real natural resource, no tax. Tax haven. In came all the businesses, unemployment disappeared, massive growth of industries. And this is what we're aiming for in the Cape, and Cape Exit and Cape Independence, to secede and to abolish all the taxes, make the Cape a tax haven, bring everything down to 0.5% TEAL, Total Economic Activity Levy, automatically deducted from the banks. And some people say, but what about cash? It doesn't matter, say the economists. It doesn't matter. It's not enough. It doesn't really matter. And the thing is, we're all being stolen from to such an extent that when the government says, oh, we need this, do you notice what happened to the 500 billion that was being made available for COVID relief?
Gone.
Sorry, it just, we can't account for it, but don't worry about that. We're going on to this level.
They were supposed to prepare the hospitals for what was coming. We went from 2,700 ICU beds to 2,776 ICU beds for 500 billion. I think that's the most expensive 76 ICU beds that has ever been bought in the history of mankind.
Yeah, that's what governments can do for you. It costs a fortune. Service goes way down, costs go way up. That's why whenever I refer to this government, I use the word cancer. What's the middle letters of cancer? A and C. And so I will write a small c, a capital A-N-C, and a small E-R. Now, I know about cancer. My wife's been battling cancer for 11 years. And cancer is absolutely hideous. A cancer is a cell in your body that does not contribute to the health of the body, but breaks down the health of the body. And I can say without any fear of contradiction, the ANC government is a cancer. They have done nothing to help this country. They've done nothing to build up this country. They've done nothing to enrich this country. They've just impoverished because they are selfish, criminal, mafia. Well, I shouldn't insult the mafia. You know what the difference is between the mafia and the government? The mafia turns a profit. Do you know what the difference is between organized crime and the government? Organized crime is organized. Do you know what the difference is between animals and people? Animals would never choose the dumbest of the herd to lead them. Honestly and truly, we have got a criminal enterprise in Pretoria. What a bunch of thieves. They have lied and stolen on everything. I challenge anyone to say, what good thing has this government ever done? They are a criminal enterprise. They have wrecked this country. They've taken this country from one of the greatest first world countries in the world that pioneered heart transplants, for goodness sakes, which was a world leader in so many things, some of the best in industry. South African rand was stronger than the British pound and the US dollar back in the 70s. How on earth is it that without a war, without sanctions, without conscription, with foreign aid, they managed to plummet the rand, destroy the economy? We had unemployment. Now, after all the sanctions, all the disinvestment, all the terrorism, all the strikes, all the fights throughout the 80s and so on, by 1994, we had, when Mandela became president, about 2-point-something million unemployed. Over 2 million unemployed. That was bad. That's seriously bad. And of course, the ANC was promising to resolve that. The ANC has managed to add 1 million more unemployed for every year that they've been in power. Unemployment's now over 30 million. Now, they play games. They say unemployed, economically inactive, discouraged work seekers. What is a discouraged work seeker? It's unemployed. What's economically inactive? Unemployed. So if you put them together, it's over 30 million people. That's more than half of the total population. So this government has, for the 26 worthless years that they've been in power, they have put 1 million more people unemployed for every year, more than 1 million. So we've gone from just over 2 million to 30 million unemployed. The ANC has done this, and their solution is more taxes, more government regulation, more BBBEE race quotas. That doesn't attract investors. That doesn't attract job creators. That chases them away. And for every person who's an entrepreneur and job creator that's been chased out of this country, that's about 11 to 12 people unemployed for every one of them. And so they might be smug and happy for all the whites they've chased out of this country, but they've been chasing out investors, job creators, employers. And what's the result? More unemployment, more degradation. And then they say, we need to do expropriation or compensation to give dignity back to the black people. There's no dignity in becoming a thief. There's no dignity in being unemployed and starving. There's no dignity in depending on foreign aid. Just ask the Zimbabweans. They did expropriation or compensation. They managed to achieve 95% unemployment, 95% unemployment, world record. Managed to destroy their currency so that a $100 trillion note couldn't buy a half a loaf of bread. And that's after they'd taken 16 zeros off the currency. $100 trillion note couldn't buy a half a loaf of bread. Now that's, and the people of Zimbabwe, more than half the population fled. That is the end result of EFF and ANC policies, expropriation or compensation. That's communism in practice. And if we can't look north of the border and see what is happening north of Limpopo, what's happening in Zimbabwe, then we don't understand where this government's taking us. That is why we in the Cape are determined, Cape exit, decentralization solution, not totalitarianism, decentralization, right down to municipal level. We need to secede from South Africa, not because we don't care about our neighbors in the rest of the country, but like in an aircraft, in the event of loss of cabin pressure, place the oxygen mask on yourself before attempting to help other passengers. Because you can't help other passengers when you've passed out. And we can't help our neighbors well unless we have our freedom. And so the Cape of Good Hope will be a good friend, a neighbor, and assistance to people in other parts of South Africa, but we can only do it when we're free of this evil government. And looking at the failure of government that we've just seen in the 9th of July and onwards, looting spree, insurrection, terrorism, violence that was created in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, we don't want that. We want to secede from chaos. And we believe that others will follow us. Yeah. And this is hope for South Africa, that we can have decentralization, and later the different nations of South Africa can join together in some kind of confederation, where it's not a political unity as much as a customs union for ease of trade and economic activity. But people will be more willing to help the neighbors if they're free and if they know that they're safe. Because right now, just to give you the Cape as an example, for every rand we get taken away from us in taxes, we get 8 cents spent back in Western Cape. We are being looted. It's just unacceptable. So if we just maintain the same standards that's going on now, if we declared independence and didn't do any other reforms, we could bring our taxes down to less than 10% they are now. In fact, imagine if we could take the tax, but that's not even regarding that most of the taxes is going in the Western Cape for cadre deployment, job creation, for communist cadres, for corruption and so on. So if we were to run a decentralized system without this corruption, we have a city manager in Cape Town who gets 2.5 million rand a year salary, plus mega perks on cell phone allowance and entertainment allowance, basically over 3 million a year. How do you justify this? When I went to school in Rhodesia, my school teacher was a member of parliament. I said, but sir, how can you be a school teacher? He said, we don't get paid for being members of parliament. We need a real job too. And back then, city councillors donated their time. They had to be successful what they did because they didn't get paid for being a city councillor. No. Mayors might have got a little bit, but it wasn't that much. Now politics is a get-rich-quick scheme. Not even counting what they steal, their salaries are theft already.
Yeah.
Is this what rates and tax are meant to be going for? Just building up a criminal elite who enrich themselves like pigs at a trough, and all at the expense of the rest of the population who are having their lives destroyed. Now, if they would just leave us alone and allow us to breathe oxygen and stop closing down our businesses and interfering with our churches and our societies, we might not be that upset. But when they are not even letting you breathe oxygen and they're telling you that your church is non-essential and your kids have to behave like this, then we say, okay, we don't like divorce, but sometimes in an abusive relationship, there's no alternative. I mean, when there's abuse and we're being abused, I mean, not just us in the Western Cape, I think all taxpayers all over South Africa are being abused. And the abuser is the ANC government. And we're not interested. It's like, get away from us. We want a restraining order and we want our freedom and independence and, get lost. That's the attitude in the Cape right now. And I don't know if you've heard the latest responses, but the polls are showing that a majority of voters in the Western Cape now want a referendum on independence from South Africa.
Very interesting. Although I must, if we look at world politics generally, I mean, we've had lots of attempts, what the Cape exit is proposing. We had the Scots tried to break away and those sort of things, and they don't really get there. Don't you stand? Aren't you going to get into a situation where maybe, let's say you do get it right to exit, you become successful, and then you end up with the same problems that like America has or Europe has, where it just becomes the light basically that are attracting the moths from those all around them, and it just becomes an untenable situation where you can't actually maintain it. You've got to start building walls and all those sort of things just to maintain what you've managed to build up. Aren't you perhaps going to end up in that situation?
Well, those are serious concerns, and those are things one has to consider, and a lot of thought has gone into it. Now, of course, the one problem with Scotland is that the socialists, who had a very socialist view, were promoting the secession of Scotland. A lot of people looked at it and recognized we would be worse off under the Scottish socialists than we would in the UK at the moment. We've got a bit of checks and balances. Quebec is another example of the French seeking secession from Canada. And what's interesting about these cases is if they had voted a majority for it, they would have been given the freedom to secede.
Yeah.
We've passed the time when most governments are willing to fight over secession. We don't have Lincolns and Lennons out there right now who we're going to, bludgeon the people to stay in the union against their will when it's done in a democratic, lawful way. But I've got a whole lot of examples of successful secessions. So we know some secessions that really work. Now, you can go way back into history. You can go back to Exodus, let my people go. Israel grew out of secession from Egypt.
Yeah.
We can go to 1 Kings and we can see how the 2 Kings, where the northern kingdom, 10 tribes, seceded from the southern kingdom of Judah. And when Judah was mobilizing for war, a prophet came and said, with a word from the Lord, go back to your houses, don't fight, this thing is of me. Yeah. And we can think of Switzerland, which seceded from Austria back 1290, and the United States seceded from America. And Finland seceded from Russia in 1917. And Norway seceded from Sweden in 1905. So there's some successful peaceful secessions. And in my own lifetime, I have witnessed Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia breaking away from the Soviet Union. Yeah. And we've seen Belarus and Ukraine breaking away from the Soviet Union, and Croatia and Slovenia breaking away from Yugoslavia successfully. And Slovakia and Czech were separating in a velvet divorce because nobody got injured, nobody was killed, nobody was injured. It was a velvet divorce, as they called it, and they called it the Velvet Revolution because it was done peacefully. South Sudan, I've been heavily involved in seeing South Sudan independent, and that 2011, that's 10 years ago, something that nobody thought was possible, not even the man who's now president of South Sudan, because I was arguing with Commander Silva Kiir back 20 years ago. He was saying this is impossible. It's a good idea, but it'll never happen. And I argued to them how the only way of freedom and peace in South Sudan is to redraw the map, because you will always be a oppressed Black Christian minority in a majority Islamic Muslim country unless you redraw the map where you're the majority and you can have your own rules and protect yourself. And Colonel John Garang, the founder of the SPLA, and his second in command, Salva Kiir, who's today the president of South Sudan, were arguing with me that it's a great idea, but it's not possible. But it happened. And so there are examples of success, and Singapore is a great example of success as well. We're living in an age where there's more secession movements. And I think while some have blown it, like you could take the Catalonians, but again, the Catalonians in Spain, they are thoroughly controlled by the Marxists. And it's understandable that the Spanish government's moved to stop having a communist like Cuba within their boundaries. So Catalonia, unfortunately, allowed the communists to hijack their independence movement. And that's why it's failed. So we've looked at this and we've decided if the Cape is to be independent, there's a whole lot of things that have to be done. We cannot just replicate what's going on in the rest of the country and carry on this way, because then we'll be in the same situation the rest of South Africa's in just a decade or two down the road. Well, that's no solution. We need a long-term solution. And so a lot of thought's gone to this, that we need free enterprise. We need decentralization. We need to put all the power back in the hands of the community. And by the municipality, we don't mean this uni-city gerrymandering of which is nothing but a cover for corruption. We mean genuine communities where the people have a shared faith, shared ethno-linguistic community, and they have genuine control. And it can't just be a whole bunch of squatters moving in from another area who outvote the residents. The taxpayers and the ratepayers who've invested in the community need to be the ones who have the vote in a municipality. Now, for the whole country, you can give it to anyone who's over whatever age, according to whatever qualified franchise is required. I would recommend a qualified franchise. But nevertheless, municipalities must have the voting only in the hands of people who are paying for the municipality, in other words, ratepayers and homeowners. And then the police must be in the control of the local municipality. Now, if the police come from that municipality, speak the language of the municipality, and are answerable to and paid by the municipality, they will not stand by while their shops are looted, because at the moment, just take Mitchell's Plain with a lot of support for independence.
Yeah.
When we've been Mitchell's Plain on several different events, we've had people explain, we don't have one single colored policeman from Mitchell's Plain in our police station. We don't have anyone who speaks our language. There's nobody even speaks Afrikaans in our local police station. They all come from the Eastern Cape. They don't care about us. They don't know. And then the pay of the local gangs and drug dealers. Said, why can't we have justice? We've got policemen from Mitchell's Plain, but they ship to the other end of the country because the police in the hands of a national authority, which is actually a criminal enterprise. So people are furious. Now, if you could put police from that area under the control of that local municipality, they're not going to stand by while their uncle's shop is looted and while their cousins and neighbors' goods are looted and burned. They're going to be involved, and if they're not, they're going to lose their job very quickly because they're answerable to that community. This is the solution. Short-term solution is put the police back under the power of the local municipalities. Make municipalities genuine communities. So, for example, Boerkop should be run by the Muslim community of Boerkop, and Mitchell's Plain should be run by Mitchell's Plain, and Bellville should be run by Bellville, and Para should be run by Para. This uni-city has been a cover for colossal corruption and incompetence, and this has got to end. And so if we get back to decentralization, the next thing is, right now, the Cape has got a lot of socialism, massive amount of socialism. We've got people coming in by the hundreds of thousands from other parts of the country, being given houses and so on. Well, there's people from the community been waiting for decades for their own house and paying taxes and rates and not getting it. This kind of BBBEE, affirmative action, race quotas, it's demographic engineering. It's unacceptable. We can't allow that. And so, again, we've got to withdraw the incentives for people to just be welfare junkies.
Yeah.
If we have lowered taxation to the point of being a tax haven, like under 1% taxes, we could expect huge influx of job creators, employers, and investors, and we could see phenomenal growth. But people who don't want to work aren't going to have anything in the Cape, because the only charity that's going to be available in the Cape is going to be from churches, communities, and families to their members, who know if they're legitimate or if they are addicted to vice and they're going to waste the money on gambling and lottos and prostitution, drugs and drink and so on. And so plainly, what we need is accountability when it comes to welfare. We care for the people we know in our community, and municipalities and churches and voluntary organizations and families can choose whether they are wanting to help these people or not. But those who just come in and demand their rights to squat and steal and loot and pillage and leave all kinds of pollution behind and litter everything and then stone trucks and loot Pentechnicans. No, they're going to get expelled and they're not going to find any room for crime here, because those communities that are serious about fighting crime will find the criminals will trick. If some communities are soft on crime, well, they'll attract a lot more crime. Very quickly, it will reward that system.
Yeah. When it comes to the legal process of secession, we know that when it came to Catalonia, the reason why they couldn't get secession was because constitutionally there was no room for secession within the country, and they used that as the reason why not to allow for the secession. And Europe actually used that to not recognize Catalonia's claim for secession. So within the context of South Africa, how would you go about obtaining secession as a province, basically, that is part of the great South Africa?
Well, I mean, the first thing that we should say is that the South African Constitution does make provision for self-determination.
Yeah.
And the African Union Constitution makes provision for self-determination. And so does the United Nations Charter. And so if it's done in a legal way, self-determination, and they even specify a group of identifiable shared geography, culture, history, language, religion, and so on. Well, I think we fit into that. In fact, if you take the whole of the Western Cape, not just the Western Cape, but the whole of Northern Cape and part of the Eastern Cape, and what we've got distinguishing us from the rest of the country is the majority home language in the whole of the Western Cape is Afrikaans, not in the rest of the country. So, but we've got an identifiable culture in many different ways. Most of the people in Western Cape are Christian. Most of the people in Western Cape are Protestant. Most of the people in Western Cape are Afrikaans speaking. And so there's a whole lot of homogenization that you can see, which you don't get in the other parts. And you can draw the line, and what makes the difference is the rainfall. The rainfall in the east of the country is plentiful, and rainfall in the west of the country is actually very little. It's arid. And that's why the vast amount of Afrikaans farmers are actually over in the Western Cape on land that is very hard to till. But you find that the Xhosa and Zulu and other tribes chose to settle in the areas with much higher rainfall, where it's much easier to herd cattle and so on. So there's a lot of reasons why the Western Cape has always been majority colored and white, and black people have only really moved into the Western Cape in recent years, especially by demographics since 1994, busing them in. But still, the ANC never won an election in the Western Cape. They've never won an election in Cape Town. They've always lost. The majority of the people vote against them. Interestingly, when you look at the recent polls, which has been scientifically done, the majority of colored voters, of course, want independence. Understandable.
Yes.
Only 27% of the whites in the Western Cape are at the moment in favor of independence. 11% of the blacks in the Western Cape are in favor of independence. So it's an interesting situation, and we haven't yet seen any serious finances going into billboards and advertising campaigns and education campaigns, which of course must precede a referendum on independence. So we are confident that we've got, this isn't just a racial issue. There's a lot of people across the board who support independence. You can't just make it, at one time people were saying the Cape Independence Movement is all white. Now the latest thing is the Cape Independence Movement is all colored. And I mean, this kind of proves but then well, why are there so many black people also supporting Cape Independence? And so they can't put it in a pigeonhole. It's across the board. In fact, it's not just Christians, it's Muslims, it's not just coloreds and whites, it's also black people. It's a wide smattering of people. How can the Cape survive? We have got many different backgrounds in terms of language, religion, culture, and ethnicity. Well, how can you work together? Look at Switzerland. There they've got French, German, Italian, Romance, Catholics, Protestants. Now, somehow Switzerland was an island of peace and stability in the ocean of war of the First and Second World War, when Germans, Italians, and French were killing one another by the millions. Switzerland stayed in peace. How did they do that? Decentralization, the canton system. And that's how they could live together in peace. Switzerland had an armed neutrality policy, and they managed to avoid, and we think this is what we can do in the Cape. The only way you can have people of different ethno-linguistic, religious ways working together is to respect the individual rights to their own municipalities, not interfere, not have a top-down heavy government. And in this situation, you will find friendship because people aren't, it's not a winner takes all, and it's not a matter of government telling you what you can and can't do. This will be determined on a local municipal level. So you can have one municipality might decide to be very liberal on some issues and others might decide to be more strict, but it'll reflect the community. And if some people don't like it, they can move to the community next door. But there's safeguards. But if you've got a top-down, once-off, and you've got a bunch of mafia criminals running it, the cancer government, then there's no escape aside from fleeing to the country. So we think the solution, not just for the Cape, but for the world, is decentralization. I think we're moving into an age of secession. Decentralization has been a whole lot of countries. Look at Eastern Europe, the amount of new countries that developed in Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union. Yeah. I think we've got to recognize South Africa is an empire. It's not a country. It's not a nation. We've got 11 official languages, which shows us at least 11 nations. Nobody asked the Cape or the Transvaal or the Free State if we want to be part of this union. The British government forced it at the point of the bayonet of the brutal Anglo-Boer War. And surely we've got the right to decide for ourselves whether we want to be part of this abusive relationship and continue to be looted or not.
Now, under Section 235, you mentioned that our Constitution does talk about self-determination.
Yes.
Now, Section 235 is very specific that it's in terms of an act of Parliament that this has to be done. Do you find it strange that this is one of the acts that Parliament has not implemented? I mean, if you look at Schedule 6 of the Constitution, it's very specific where it says that all legislation has to be enacted timeously. Yet this is the one act that they have not looked at all. Yes. Do you find that?
But it is, and you understand where it's coming from. We've got a bunch of totalitarians in the cancer government. But bear in mind, there never was a provision in the British law or constitution for the colonies of the Americas to break away and form the United States of America. It happened because they couldn't control it. There wasn't provision in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics for Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, or any of the other places, Armenia, Georgia, to break away. But they did. 15 countries broke away. The same with Czech and Slovakia and Yugoslavia. So you can be sure the government of Sudan did not have a constitutional amendment make it possible for South Sudan to secede. It just is when the movement reached that stage and with the amount of international support. So basically these things, politics is the art of what can be negotiated and organized. And so the first priority is education, mobilizing people on the ground to see the benefits of this and looking at it rationally. And so the government may have their preferences, and we know where they are. But as a failed state, they may not have a choice. You've probably heard of R.W. Johnson. R.W. Johnson's a British economist, and he wrote a book back in the 1980s, How Long Will South Africa Survive? And he made a prediction that by the mid-1990s, economics will force South Africa to make some kind of internal settlement because of just economic reasons. And he proved to be quite accurate there. Well, recently he produced a new book called How Long Will South Africa Survive? Same title, different book. And in it, he predicts that the ANC is heading towards being a failed state. And when they can't continue to pay the bills, and when they can't continue to keep the lights on and the electricity and so on flowing well and the water flowing, then you're going to see parts of the country break away. And he said the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal are the first two who will probably break away, followed by others. The interesting thing is not just that he wrote that, but R.W. Johnson moved his whole family to the Cape and he's living somewhere in Tableview now. Now, that's an international economist who's looked into this. And I do believe, from many different reasons, the Western Cape is different. I mean, you know that, you've been here.
Yeah.
And I believe that not only will we get our independence, but I think the Kingdom of Zululand will also get their independence. Yeah. And I believe that an element of the Transvaal and Venda and Siskan, I think we're going to see a whole lot of other nations coming out of this top-down Soviet Union type of structure. And later on, some kind of confederation will arise to bring about some form of customs union, but a confederation where there's not interference in the other cantons or provinces, or in this case, independent states. So this is where we're aiming. It's not that we're writing off the rest of the country. It's that we can't, demographics, we can't, voting patterns, we can't change the whole country immediately. But we can save the Western Cape. And with that, we hope shortly after that, the Northern Cape will join us. And then we trust Kingdom of Zululand will break away. And ultimately, this will be for the good of the whole country, as it'll bring down big government and bring up local municipalities back the way. So this is where I think we've got to go. We can't just have the idea of secession without rethinking the whole way. What's failed? Well, socialism fails. Centralization has failed. We've got to go to the exact opposite: free enterprise, decentralization, respecting our neighbors. And so, not to mention our spiritual roots as well. Most of the people of the Western Cape are Christians. Most are Protestants. We've got to honor that. Now, we'll not interfere with our Muslim neighbors, and they will be happy to have their communities. And I've met with Muslim leaders, and a lot of Muslim leaders are very excited about Cape independence because they see we've got a godless government in Pretoria. They would prefer to have Christian neighbors rather than the secular humanist governments above them, knowing that we will respect our Muslim neighbors better than the secularists, because they outraged about the pornography and the abortion and the LGBTQ perversion and what's going on in the schools, and everyone's fed up. And so there's got to be a solution. And I've got 4 children, 3 grandchildren, all living in Cape Town. None of our family is overseas. We're all here, we committed. And for the sake of my children and grandchildren, I want to leave a future for them, a country that can give them hope. And the present situation on the ANC does not give one hope for the future, which is why so many people have left. And here's the other great thing. When the Cape gets its independence, we're going to see a lot of people who moved to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America, and so on, will come back. And I know I've already heard from many people, if they can see a hope for the future, many want to be, they're bored out of their minds or they're frustrated in what they find over there, and they know where home is and they want to come back. So we will give hope, and when they come back, they'll be bringing more jobs and investment. And so this gives us a hope for the future to think of secession.
Peter, been at this for quite a while. I just want to say thank you. I think we must definitely take this up again. I mean, you've raised on points over here that are so important to the future of this country. And we do recognize that we are facing a major onslaught, and it's not just in South Africa. This is a worldwide onslaught. We've seen the march towards a socialist communist environment happening in America, England, all over the world, how this march has been going. And eventually we have to, I think, draw the line in the sand and say this far and no further. I mean, the most successful countries you're talking about are those that recognize diversity. America, which was 52 different states, and you've got, like you said, Catalonia, I mean, not Catalonia, but Switzerland with on systems, and even England itself, which is made up of many different nations formed together under a single union. It is the obvious solution. And I think it's the biblical solution, because when God took Israel into Canaan, he gave each one their space. And I think we need to recognize that godly principle. But it's going to, like you said, it's going to take hard work, and it's going to take people really beginning to think out of the box, because I think we've been indoctrinated for a long, long time. And people are going to have to start coming out of that mindset. But I just want to say thank you, Peter, for an absolutely amazing interview. I've enjoyed every minute, and I'm sure the viewers are going to enjoy every minute of it. And thank you for the wonderful information that you've given us, so that we can really start thinking clearly and plainly about the world around us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to get hold of me, my email is peter@frontline.org.za. peter@frontline.org.za, and I've set up a new website called capeofgoodhope.africa. capeofgoodhope.africa. And on there, I've put articles which include videos, audios on a case for Cape independence, eyewitness to successful secession movements, reclaiming our communities, secession, the Bible and history, and a range of others, including the right for self-determination as it is in different laws. So there's a whole series of resources, including a manual that I've put together with some other people's input in a Cape Independence Handbook. And the Cape Independence Handbook is freely available can be read or downloaded off that website. So anyone goes to capeofgoodhope.africa web, or on Facebook, it's the Cape of Good Hope Facebook page, and you'll see a whole lot of these links where there's a lot of what we've been thinking. I'm chairing the Cape Independence Forum, which has got a wide range of different groups to try and get them talking and working together. And the fact that there's been such a growth in this, exponential growth. I think the lockdown and the riots and looting in KZN have also pushed this forward, whereas before it was a small minority thinking this way. Now it seems that a clear majority are considering Cape independence in our area. And obviously we're praying for similar decentralization, freedom in other parts of our country too.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. And yes, please, we ask our viewers to get a hold of you, because these are important matters. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, Richard. God bless. Keep strong.